Well, nowadays you got to have that confidence because people nowadays.
Before we get straight into the podcast, I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, Declan Kirby GAA Star. Declan Kirby GAA Star Championship Journey. It's a series of GAA team children's books written by primary school teacher and GAA coach Michael Egan. You can check it out in the link in the description down below, of course, as well. Follow the trials and tribulations of Declan Kirby and his team at Smithgreen Gaelic Football Club, recently formed but promising GAA team. The book is now available in Easons and all good bookshops, so check it out in the description down below, and let's get straight into it. What's the story, everyone? Welcome back to GAA Fan TV. I hope you're all keeping wonderfully well. My name is Aaron and this is the Football Predictions Show. Two games, of course, happening this weekend. We have two provincial finals. We're down to 8 teams now in the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship, and just like we know it, the All-Ireland Championship will be all but over. You know, down to 8 teams, down to 6 teams now in hurling as well, so things are really escalating. And of course there will be a hurling preview that'll be out tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But obviously today we're focusing on the two football matches happening this weekend, and it's going to be very interesting. You know, very traditional and old historic rivalries between Kerry and Cork and Galway and Mayo down the years. You know, two games that have certainly stung up its surprises down the years, have stung up some massively huge encounters, and have certainly brought some big moments in GAA history down the years. In particular, Kerry and Cork, which is probably the pick of the two rivalries, with all due respect about Mayo and Galway. You know, the Kerry and Cork rivalry is just, I don't think people realise probably how big of a rivalry it is in Gaelic football. I'd probably put it second to Dublin and Kerry. Maybe Dublin and Mayo, you could argue, is in there. Tyrone and Kerry had a big rivalry down the years as well. But like Kerry and Cork, you know, the first time two sides from Munster played each other in a provincial final. I mean, what an occasion that was, going back in the late 2000s. Just some of the historic meetings and battles these have had down the years, and even of course the game last year between Cork and Kerry, you know, when Mark Keane comes back from the AFL and literally what was probably his only touch of the ball when he came off the bench, he ends up scoring the winner in quite extraordinary circumstances. So, and of course the weather's been fantastic as well, which makes these games even better. You know, sitting there out the back in the sun with a beer, I mean, you just can't beat it whatsoever. And these two games will be hopefully very competitive and hopefully definitely entertaining. I mean, Kerry and Cork probably in most people's eyes, from what I could see, actually, now the fact that Dublin kind of struggled against Meath and the fact that Kerry blitzed through their two games, a lot of people feel like this might be the most one-sided game of all 4 provincial finals. I mean, it certainly wasn't that case last year when Kerry played Cork in a semi-final, and I certainly have seen, you know, a few different people commenting on different videos that I've made and whatnot, saying Kerry might end up winning this by 20 plus, you know, 20 to 25 points. Personally, I don't see it being that way. And breaking down this game first of all and talking about it in more detail, it's going to be very fascinating, very interesting, because I think when the draw was made, I think Kerry coming into this year, you know, they still haven't gotten rid of the ghost that was last year when they got beat by Cork. They still haven't gotten rid of that, and they probably won't get rid of that until they win an All-Ireland, to be perfectly honest. But, you know, if they go out and beat Cork quite convincingly, beat them by 10 to 15 points, you know, it just shows, it kind of just reminds Cork that you still have a bit to do to get up to their level, to get up to Kerry's level. Like, you might have beaten Kerry last year, but you still have a bit to go. You still need to kind of make those extra steps in order to keep up at Kerry's level, because Kerry, we all know this year, have been absolutely fantastic. The best team in the country so far this year anyway, no two questions about it. David Clifford has obviously been an All-Star Footballer of the Year, potentially. I mean, is he All-Star Footballer of the Year right now? I mean, probably still a bit to go and still a long way to go. Obviously, a lot of games still to play, but, you know, Kerry's attack and firepower is nothing short of remarkable. You know, when you've got Paul Gainey in there, who's looked brilliant this year, Killian Spillane coming off the bench, Sean O'Shea. I mean, look, listen, we know the options that Kerry have, and even the fact that James O'Donoghue has stepped away from the panel, it doesn't even make a difference, because Kerry just have options there, you know, in numbers. It kind of reminds me a bit of what it was like for Dublin maybe 3-4 years ago, where someone might step away and, you know, Bernard Brogan's retired, sure, it doesn't really make much of a difference. Sure, we have Paul Mannion and, you know, we've got Con O'Callaghan coming through and whatnot, so it doesn't really make a difference. So for Kerry, so much attack and firepower all across the board. Their midfield looks very good as well. Like, Diarmuid O'Connor has been exceptional this year. David Moran's improved since the championship started. He struggled obviously in the Dublin game, but I think as the championship's gone along, he's definitely improved a lot more. And I think the matchups is going to be very fascinating, because Sean Power was probably Cork's best player in the Limerick game. Now I know he went off early with a bit of a niggle, so I'm not too sure whether he's going to be injured for this game. But if he does play, he could end up picking up David Clifford, which will certainly be a very fascinating encounter indeed. And you know, Cork got their matchups right last year against Kerry. They done a fantastic job on Kerry's forwards. David Clifford had a very, you know, his influence certainly wasn't that big in the game compared to maybe some of the games we've seen this year. And Cork done a great job of just neutralising what Kerry had. You know, the conditions were tough, conditions were physical, and it was very tough for Kerry to play the way that Kerry want to play. And obviously, Kerry were a lot more defensive than usual. I mean, they had Brian O'Buglock playing at wing forward, and we all know that Brian O'Buglock is in fact a defender, which shows obviously that Kerry were set up defensively. And we know about this whole story already. We don't need to go into it in too much more detail, but it will be interesting to see how Kerry kind of try and change their approach, because personally I don't think Cork are going to change too much from how they played against Limerick and from how they played, of course, against Kerry last year. Because look, listen, it worked for them, it got them over the line, but it is a completely different setting and scene. I mean, in that game it was torrential wind and rain, and it was almost like a hurricane watching it on the pitch. I mean, it's going to be the complete opposite this weekend. You know, you're talking about a heat wave and whatnot, unless the rain comes back, which in Ireland tends to happen anyway. But I could imagine, I do imagine that the weather will be absolutely brilliant this weekend, which I don't think will suit Cork's defensive style in this game, should they approach that kind of style. And even looking at some of the players that Cork played in the last game, for example, like even Rory Dean and Ian McGuire, very strong physical players. You had Kevin Flahiv, who came back in a cornerback, who could potentially be going up against Paddy Clifford or maybe even a Paul Gainey. And you know, you've Sean Meehan in there, probably going to try and influence or try and stop the influence of Sean O'Shea. So I mean, there's a lot of interesting battles in there, and I think for Kerry, what they need to do really is get rid of the ghost of last year. Don't think about it. Don't focus on it. And look, I don't think they have been. I think they've come into this year without any pressure at all. They're playing with no pressure. They're playing with no fear, which is the way they need to play, because that is the way they could very well go on and win in All-Ireland. And I think, having looked at Dublin play already once or twice this year, I think a lot of people would probably fancy Kerry to go on and win the All-Ireland. And even for myself at the moment, it's very, you know, I still fancy Dublin right now, but still Kerry are looking very good at the moment. It's going to be, you know, insanely tough to stop them this year. So they need to move the ball quickly. You know, the likes of your David Cliffords, you know, Killian Spillane if he starts, Sean O'Shea, Tony Brosnan, whoever's in that forward line, they need to move the ball quickly. They need to move it fast. Micheál Burns may be coming off the bench as well. I mean, see, the problem for Cork is if they set up too deep, you're inviting Kerry to kick from distance, and Kerry have the players to kick from distance. I mean, they have some of the best players in the game to do that. David Clifford and Paul Gainey, for example, Paddy Clifford as well. So, to be honest, I just see Kerry having way too much for Cork. You know, Kerry could easily go out and blitz Cork by 10 to 15 points. It wouldn't surprise me in the least. But at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if Cork kept this very competitive, because in the past 2 to 3 years, Cork's best performances in the championship have been against Kerry. 2019, they actually played really well that day, and that was when they were coming in on the back of a relegation to Division 3. And last year they were brilliant as well. They done what was needed. They kept themselves in the game. For Cork to win the game, they need a few things to happen though. First of all, Luke Connolly hasn't been at his best form so far this year. Didn't score in the Limerick game, missed a couple of frees. Like, he is their sharpshooter, he is their main man. And if Cork are going to get over the line, you know, you seen what happened last year against Kerry, for example. Luke Connolly comes off the bench, kicks 2 or 3 fantastic scores, and obviously plays a vital part in that goal as well. I mean, he was going for the score and the ball ended up dropping short, but nonetheless, he took that risk, he took that chance. And in the end, it paid off, and it just goes to show sometimes you need to take that risk, and maybe you might get a bit of luck along the way. So Luke Connolly needs to be in absolute tip-top form. Brian Hurley's been brilliant so far this year. John O'Rourke has obviously been brilliant as well. Mark Collins, whether he starts or comes off the bench, has been another fantastic influence as well. Obviously, Cathal O'Mahony is injured, which will be a disappointment from a core point of view. And obviously Ian McGuire, like, potentially going up against either a David Moran or a Jeremy O'Connor. Cork need to win that battle, because Ian McGuire is probably Cork's best midfielder, or best player arguably, you could say. I mean, Luke Connolly, I'd say on his day, is a little bit better, but so far this year Ian McGuire has, in my opinion anyway, been their best player. So it's going to be very intriguing, but I do think ultimately that Kerry will just have too much. I think they when you match up the two teams all across the pitch, I just think Kerry will have too much firepower. Do expect Cork to keep it tight, to keep it close, to give themselves a bit of a chance going into the final, 5 to 10 minutes. But ultimately, I do feel Kerry will win the game. So I'm going to go with Kerry to win it by 7 points. You've then, of course, got Mayo and Galway, another very traditional rivalry, of course, in Gaelic games. And certainly down the years, Mayo and Galway is a game that has produced some big moments in Gaelic football, whether it was the qualifier win for Mayo back in 2019, that was a huge win for Mayo. Of course, they were coming into that game on the back of a very bad run against Galway, and of course Mayo were the ones that eventually wrote that wrong, I suppose you could say. And obviously Galway, ended their own bad run against Mayo, of course, back in 2016 or 2017, when they went on to eventually win a Connacht title. So I think there's a lot on the line here going into this game. Mayo are a team that I think a lot of people are looking at as probably the third best team in the country, even without Cillian O'Connor in the team. But Mayo haven't been tested this year. They've played Sligo and Leitrim, with all due respect to those two counties in the Munster Championship so far. They've played Division 2 teams they've been in Division 2, and obviously they were promoted from Division 2, winning every game quite comfortably. Even the Meath team they played was a second string team, so they weren't even tested in any way in that game. So Mayo haven't been tested at all. Galway have been tested. Every game Galway have played has been extremely competitive, and it's been on the line. It's been games that really matter. And it's been games that have been going into the melting pot, like the Roscommon game. They had to really work for. Monaghan, okay, they were beat, but they worked for the entirety of the 70 minutes and obviously extra time as well. And even in their league games, they obviously beat Roscommon in a league game, and of course against the Dubs and against Kerry. They were blitzed obviously by Kerry, but certainly they were playing a lot higher quality opposition, and I do think that will stand to Galway more going into this game. And obviously with the fact that Galway do have a few players back from injury, like Damien Comer's back in the team now. He got a game against Roscommon. Any rustiness maybe that he had is probably, maybe worn off potentially going into this game. Shane Walsh, had another game under his belt. Robert Finnerty's been a great addition to the team so far this year. Kieran Malloy's obviously come back in at wing back, very underrated player in my opinion for Galway. So I do give Galway a chance. They definitely do have a chance, and they're probably more of an experienced team than Mayo in terms of they've more players in the team that have been around longer than some of the Mayo players. Now obviously, the Mayo players have played in an All-Ireland final last year. They've won Connacht titles. They're more experienced in terms of winning, but in terms of playing, obviously Galway are probably more experienced. So you can balance the two out and look at it whatever way you will, but I do expect Mayo to win. I just think Galway just haven't improved this year in my opinion. If anything, they've regressed. I do think they have a young team with the likes of Sean Kelly, Paul Kelly, who've come into the side. They've some great under-20 players coming through, like Matthew Tierney's been fantastic this year since coming into the side. Tom O'Culhan's a great addition coming off the bench. Galway are one of those sides, a bit like Tyrone this year. You're kind of waiting for them to click. You're waiting for them to get into gear. And look, they could put out a dominating display against Mayo and beat them by 5 points and shock us all completely. And then we'll be like, that was the Galway of post-lockdown under Padraig Joyce that we've all been waiting for. But really, since the lockdown, they've had enough games now since the lockdown, in my opinion, to really try and get back to the way that they did play before the lockdown. And it just isn't working. It just hasn't happened for them yet. They just haven't quite had the same influence. And even in the Roscommon game, they certainly were quite defensive, similarly to Roscommon. It'd be interesting to see if they adopt that same approach against Mayo. And Mayo just, even against Leitrim, the way they move the ball, they're just phenomenal athletes, even in the Clare game as well, moving the ball so quickly. The likes of your Ryan O'Donoghue's, your Paddy Durkins, Owen McLaughlin if he's in there, Fionn McDonough, these guys, they move the ball so quickly and they really just don't take any prisoners whatsoever. And the Leitrim and Sligo game will have been confidence boosters for the likes of your Tommy Conroy's, Paul Towie's and whatnot. So I do think Mayo will have enough quality. I think they do have Galway's number a little bit at the moment. I know that doesn't count for too much. We've seen Donegal have had Tyrone's number for the past couple of years. Tyrone went and turned them over at the weekend. So it's not impossible that Galway don't go and win this game. But I just think that Galway, they've been a yard off the pace this year. They haven't moved the ball quick enough. Their passing hasn't been quite up to order. Their accuracy in front of goal hasn't been brilliant either. Decision making hasn't been there either. And I could see Mayo punishing Galway in the big moments with the likes of Aidan O'Shea's causing a lot of problems, especially for that Galway fullback line. and even the likes of Tommy Conroy to snatch on the loose ball, Ryan O'Donoghue to break forward, Paddy Durkin, excellent of course going forward from wing back or centre back or wherever he plays. And I'll be interested to see how Galway try and nullify that, because like, will Galway track back when the Mayo wing backs go forward? I'm not sure. So it could create an overlap and just create extra space for Mayo. So I'm going to go with Mayo to get the victory by 2. It could be a lot closer than people think. Maybe Galway will be able to pull off a shock, but personally I just think that Mayo will have a little bit more than Galway on the day and they'll win it by 2 points. But anyway, we'll go ahead and wrap this up here. Do leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Of course, as I said, the hurling preview will be out tomorrow. Of course, 2 qualifier games happening this weekend in the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship. So do stay tuned for those 2 previews, or the preview in total. That'll be out, of course, tomorrow. Otherwise, stay safe, stay well, enjoy the good weather, and I'll see you all soon.